value judgment on it, but it's as though I had a sense that if I said this one thing, at some point it would be useful down the road. So without
any triggers, possibly. Like I think it's possibly like any trigger words or something like you're not like you could be explaining something until like.
Because even within the context of words.
But Kaiser, you said the same thing. That's all that is being trying to be said here, is that there is a same thing, whether we all contain within our definition of that thing all that thing is.
But sameness
is the same thing.
Sameness is a function of metaphysicality. So fungibility, sameness, infinite copies of things.
The level.
Okay, I think I'm ready.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Time starts now. So framework is value is justice, and the value criterion is principled restraint, which is the criterion and weighing mechanism. So foremost, do no harm. Secondly, be humble. Employ skepticism regarding predictions. Tag. All disputes collapse to legitimization of property rights claim. Kinsella A. 2014. It is important to emphasize that every dispute is always really about scarce resources, and every proposed or disputed law is ultimately about the use of force against some identifiable scarce resource, a human body or other scarce resources in the world that humans can employ as means of action. When the state threatens to jail people for disobeying drug laws, the state is asserting an ownership claim over its citizens' bodies. When the state taxes people, it's taking their money. Aggression, invasion of property rights is unjustifiable. This matters or should matter to those who care about justice and justifying their claims. Analysis. Note, Judge, that by participating in this debate at all, my opponent implicitly concedes that the determinant factor is justification. If the use of government force by my opponent advocates is legitimate, it must be justified, and all policy justifications inherently are claims regarding the legitimacy of property rights. Thompson and 295A. My opponent's policy prescription is legitimized through a faulty lens, output-oriented logic. In democratic constitutions, any discussion about democratic legitimacy will be underpinned broadly by two kinds of logic. One, output-oriented logic of legitimacy. Think of democracy as government for the people, where political choices are legitimate if and because they effectively promote the common welfare of the constituency in question. Thus, in this view, policy networks may have the potential to contribute to effective and efficient outcomes. 2. Input-oriented logic of legitimacy. Thinking of democracy as government by the people, where multiple political communities are equal in terms of their participation in and control of political decisions. In other words, people are able to make compromises to affect political decisions. The input-oriented approach means evaluating legitimacy against only those metrics that can equally be applied to all groups. All real compromises predicated on a principle restraint that emerges from the adoption of rights as a deciding metric of justification. This is necessarily the case as any alternative prioritizes outcomes over legitimacy in order to violate rights without legal sanction. Tag. Scholars now broadly agree that output-oriented logic only serves to justify inequity. Due to a stronger engagement of society in policy and decision-making in a more cooperative model. Analysts who were at once advocates of government for the people are increasingly advocating government by the people. Boundaries between the two kinds of logic, which were once clear, have now become blurred both in academic circles as well as in broader civil society. So now on to ground and fiat observations. Observation 1 is that that affirmative must advocate the provision of a UBI in the status quo. The status quo includes existing social programs like in-kind benefits. The status quo includes subsidies for healthcare. The status quo includes a 33% retention of wealth for retirement/disability contingencies called Social Security. They cannot replace these social programs, but must add on to it. Observation 2 is that conceptually UBI affirms progressivism. Peters and Peer, 1998. A. My opponents attempt to affirm while concurrently ignoring the actual path-dependent impacts of UBI, and those are progressivism. The objectives and concrete design of administrative reform mirror the historical, political, and societal roles of public administration as well as its internal culture. Such reforms are path-dependent, probably to much greater extent than we generally realize. Now, progressivism impacts. Shaw, 2010. Progressivism rejects America's foundational principles of human equality, natural rights, consent of government, and limited government. Progressives assert that all men were not created equal. Some people are more historically advanced than others. Rights are not tied to human nature. Government creates rights. Now it's the AT lump sum. If there are no requirements for UBI, people will be even more incentivized not to work, affirming progressivism. Poor people have already demonstrated they cannot spend their money well by simply being poor. If they get their hands on dollar bills, they would probably spend it on things like drugs or alcohol instead of food. This is worse than the redistributive system we have today. Now on to connection level. So first is the harms to wealth equity, and this is their AT income inequality, as they claim is the biggest impact in this round. Tag, completely counterproductive. UBIs are even worse than systems today. Redistributive policies can only affect the change they seek when they better attain distributive goals by removing existing barriers to naturally occurring solutions. Redistribution may have a positive impact on growth by correcting credit market imperfections that prevent productive investments by lowering the tax rate or by freeing other distortionary income redistribution mechanisms. And now onto the complex adaptive systems. Time-space compression deprecates legislation. My opponent is arguing via an inaccurate systems theory. Immense impact on present and future levels of human well-being, political stability, and democratic vitality, a global time-space compression. Gallus B. Characterized by periods of incremental change followed by fast and other irreversible change and surprises with immense consequences for economies. My opponent's deprecative systems theory framework means they lack the analytical leverage to affirm. And finally, federalism. My opponent's economic analysis is based on an inadequate and deprecated model of federalism. Because my opponent has failed to account for vertical externalities, their predicted impacts are all wrong. When the government provides more, the states must tax more, which, because government provision always removes tax revenue attained through market share, which their provision invalidates. And vertical externalities leave state taxes too high. Each state unduly discounts the pressure on federal spending it creates by raising its own tax rate, so setting off incentive effects that shrink the federal tax basis, insofar as those pressures are shared across all states. That's Keen 2.2b. And finally, now onto the the AF crypto tax plan. And now to address my opponent's plan. While it seems economically beneficial, here are the reasons why funding UBI with cryptocurrency tax cannot be executed. 1. The plan is entirely speculative and no reason to assume it will work, considering the fact that most cryptocurrency in the status quo fail to develop real value. The AF has no solvency advocate that suggests a blockchain architecture that can account for the 4% taxation plan. Their plan may prove technologically impossible currently. If we affirm, not only do we affirm something that may not be successful or address UBI, it will cause everyone to lose a lot of money for subscribing to this plan. Judge, even if you buy their implementing cryptocurrency plan, there's no way to guarantee that Congress will use the money to fund UBI. And keep in mind, Judge, that they are trying to use their fiat twice. Once to replace status quo systems programs with UBI, and then another to fund the UBI fund the UBI with cryptocurrency. Their plan is not a plan about UBI. It's a currency plan that is disguised under the assumption that will fund for UBIs. I strongly urge a negative ballot.
Okay. All right. we gotta. Oh, I forgot to do cross after my speech.
Yeah. Oh.
My bad. So let's do you cross me and then I'll cross you.
Okay. Okay. The time starts now. So, does your cryptocurrency plan does it work? Like, is there the sufficient architecture for it?
Sure. I mean, the nice thing about a cryptocurrency is its architecture is crowdsourced, in a sense, or its mechanics are crowdsourced, even if its architecture is not.
Wait, so, like, are you positive that, like, there is, like, technology that's good enough to actually implement the 4% taxation?
Well, nothing in life's certain, but we do the best we can.
I see. And what happens if that fails? Like,
Well, then, shit happens. But we have to vote on what the best option is, what the best possibility is. And this is the best proactive, decisive, forward-thinking, solvency-minded advocacy available to us, so let's vote for it.
but doesn't your plan of UBI actually worsen poverty? As, like, it might give people the money to spend on drugs and alcohol.
Well, it might give them the money to spend on investment in new businesses as well. Just because some people will misuse funds some of the time doesn't mean it's a bad idea to provide funds for people, because those same people who misuse funds this time might next time learn from it and use them wisely.
And how can we, like, predict that?
Well, we can't, but that's the whole point, is to be less paternalistic. So you make a progressivism critique in your case, but my whole point is UBI is less progressive than the status quo. So let's switch over to it. So we're on the same side on progressivism, except you're wrong in thinking that UBI is progressive.
Okay. So, like, what is your argument about income inequality? How does it solve income inequality?
Well, the problem with normal methodologies that people use to solve income inequality is that they aren't unconditionally lump sum. That is to say that they either incentivize poverty by means testing, or they infantilize the poor by providing a bunch of conditions on how they can spend the money. But really, what we need to do is enable people's free will, autonomy, and agency as moral agents, as individual people, and then that's the best way we can improve the economy and everything else in life.
So, like, aren't you, like, fiating twice by replacing existing systems and also using the cryptocurrency, fiating that the Congress would, like, pay for your plan?
Well, I've got a couple arguments for that. Number one, the reality is, in the status quo, the only manifestations of UBI that ever get talked about at all are those that are libertarian-minded, that is to say, presented to replace social programs. And number two, if I am fiating twice, then it's a plan, and it's a funding plank, and it counts as okay in plan debate.
Oh, okay.
Forgot it. Okay, so now I'll cross you, okay?
Okay.
So you tell me when time starts?
The time starts now.
Okay, so is it your position that if I solve for progressivism, that I should win the round?
If you solve for progressivism?
You're the one who critiqued it, right?
No, you don't win the round.
Why not?
Because there are other impacts.
No, dude, say it's because path dependency precedes that as a question. You'd have to get back to path dependency. You say path dependency precedes that as a question. In other words, my progressivism critique follows from my path dependency critique. You have to successfully defeat the path dependency critique to defeat the point of the critique. The progressivism critique is just substantiation for the path dependency critique.
Wait, so the path dependency critique, like, it says, like, in order to carry out a UBI, it must affirm progressivism, right?
No, you say that UBI does affirm progressivism implicitly to itself as an idea because it's the
Okay,
idea
yeah.
that we should get more money to more people and less money centralized into the hands of few people and more into the hands of more people, right?
Okay, yeah.
So you're saying progressivism is bad, and I'm saying, well, if I show that this is actually less progressive than the status quo and that I solve for progressivism, shouldn't I win the round? You say, well, no, because my progressivism critique is just part of my substantiation for the path dependency critique. The problem is you're not thinking about things as being path dependent enough. You think that you can change one variable and it won't impact the way the variables interact with each other, but in reality it will. You're treating this as a simple closed system when really it's a complex multivariate system and you can't predict the outcomes.
Okay.
Okay, so is there CASs in this or no? The complex adaptive systems critique? I forget.
What are CAS?
CAS is complex adaptive systems. Is that critique in this case? I forget.
Complex? Yeah, it is. Is it K? Is a critique on legislative decision making?
Did you get
Is
to
it
that?
kind? Oh yeah.
Oh, you did. I just didn't. I was busy taking notes and didn't hear it, I guess. Okay. So, yeah, that's the thing. The path dependency thing is actually, and to be perfectly honest, the progressivism critique comes from the path dependency critique, and the path dependency critique comes from the complex adaptive systems critique. So you should say you've got two layers of walls between yourself and the actual critique they need to address. The complex adaptive systems critique, you say they can't access that ground without first defeating the path dependency critique, and you tell them they can't access the path dependency critique until they defeat the progressivism critique.
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, they'll probably call bullshit on that, but the point is, you say no. You just lay it out there really confidently, right? You just be like, no. No, they didn't defeat my path dependency critique. They attacked because they failed to attack successfully my progressive critique, which substantiates the path dependency critique. To defeat path dependency, they have to defeat the substantiation of it, which is the progressive critique. Now, they failed to do that, so they couldn't possibly defeat a path dependency. Oh, they did that? Okay, well, even if they did that, they didn't in and of itself defeat path dependency. That just means they can now argue successfully against path dependency. But in order to do that, they'd have to critique the underlying engine of path dependency, which is complex adaptive systems. But in order to even make that critique, they have to be guilty of the simple closed system kind of thinking that I'm critiquing in the first place. So, gosh, they just can't win the round. Okay.
Wait, so like, you actually make that argument, like?
Yeah, you should, but you got to let it play out step by step, right? Make them do the work first, and then make them at the very end of it go, okay, Judge, that is bullshit. You know, but make sure they will have had to make all the right choices all the way along that step of argumentation.
Yeah.
And they're not going to do that. They're not going to get to the end where they expose that you're just full of shit, right?
Yeah. Okay. So wait, and also like, so the framework, like, I think it's a bit too long.
Okay, well, I'm not saying it's perfect. Change it as you see fit. Make a copy of it. Make a copy of it, though, okay?
Okay.
And change your copy of it. Do you want to go into what's next? My next speech?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go into that one. How many minutes is that one? That's 4 minutes. 3 minutes or 4 minutes?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. The last one's 3. Okay. So if you put 4 minutes on the clock and tell me time starts now, then I'll go over and do your shit. Okay?
Okay. Time starts now.
Okay, Judge, I'm going to go over my opponent's points in succession and basically in order. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything on the flow, obviously, but I'm going to do my best I can here. First, let's talk about his justification point. He says that I concede to the fact that that justifications matter. Well, of course justifications matter. That's why I presented my own justification metric and framework. He simply ignores my own framework, right? He drops it and says, oh, we ought to prefer this framework by which we do a critique of systems and such like that, except he doesn't actually respond to my framework points, which were quite clear that we need to directly address inequality. If we're going to do something at all as a federal agent, agent of action, as a governmental agent of action, we ought to do something that is in a meaningfully concrete framework like the one I presented, which gives us measurable outcomes we can actually test to see if it's going to work or not. And we ought to follow the the argumentation as to whether if I successfully argue it's going to work, we should do it. We shouldn't worry so much about it being presented in exactly the right kind of language like my opponent's trying to present. He said I'm using the wrong lens, but I'm not actually relying on any kind of outcome-oriented metric, though I would win on that metric as well, because mine is a more principled approach, because mine actually reduces progressivism, which he critiques, and which I agree with that critique. And the reason it reduces progressivism is because it's more fair. In other words, it's more principlist, consistent than is the negation, because in my advocacy I replace things that are currently not consistent with principlism at all with something that's more consistent with principlism. Even if it's not perfectly consistent, it improves towards the same non-outcome oriented metric that he's advocating, so I win under his framework. Next, it says it's only used to justify. He says that the kind of outcome-oriented metrics are only used to justify bad things. But if that were the case, then the impacts of a given policy would be contingent on the arguments made in advance to justify it, and that's obviously not so. Just like it doesn't matter whether I argue that I should give you a banana because it's going to kill you, or whether I argue that I should give you a banana because it's healthy for you. If you eat it and you are healthy, it doesn't really matter what the arguments were. The impacts are the thing that matters. We should focus on that instead. Next, let's talk about his path dependency critique. He said his progressivism critique is not substantiating his path dependency critique. It's actually exclusive of it. Path dependency means we can't apply these sort of general rules. We have to look at the contextual specifics of the situation in order to justify the policy prescription. But that is, in fact, exactly what I do when I say that the specific path dependency here is the lump sum quality of the money dispersed, and that's why we should, among other reasons, prefer this approach to the less path-dependent approach to the status quo. He's ignoring that again. Don't let him win on that, Judge. Next, he says, we should... I just said that. Never mind. Next thing. Same barriers card. He said we basically have the same card in the case that says by the barriers. That's my opponent simply trying to muddy the waters with doublespeak here, because in fact the barriers to status quo that he's talking about are in the status quo. I mean, the barriers to solvency that he's talking about are in the status quo. They're the same barriers that I'm removing with my advocacy. He simply ignores that and pretends as though my advocacy reinforces those barriers in the status quo. Don't let that win the round for you either, Judge. Okay, inaccurate systems theory, mutually impactful. To the extent that we are both guilty of inaccurate systems theory, then no meaningful argumentation can ever be done in a round. Obviously, meaningful argumentation can be done in a round because people win and lose rounds all day long, and some people win on AF. So it is, in fact, experientially, specifically, and in every way knowable to us, directly in contradiction of what we know is to be reality. So systems theory may be whatever it is. If they want to win that point, fine. Except we also know that often policy does affect the change we want it to affect, even if it has unintended outcomes. And we can predict better than nothing at all. So that's why we prefer my approach to his. And then next it says externalities. He talks about vertical externalities. My plan actually solves unequal externalities by applying a singular tax to new wealth that is untaxable by the states, therefore eliminating the issue of taxation inequalities and externalities, verticalities in the external taxation schemes that he refers to in his card. And then last of all, he says it's speculative, most fail to attain real value, except for the fact that almost all cryptocurrencies do attain real value. Again, it's simply counter to fact. Thanks for me. Did I do a pretty good job?
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I tried that time. I tried hard.
There's a lot of stuff to go to. So would LD judges basically get all of that in?
If you got a good judge, they would. But you gotta get a flow judge for sure. You gotta get an experienced LD or policy judge. Then they would be flowing all that shit.
I see.
Well, you can answer all that. Let me share with you the text here that I have. I'll share it on my screen, okay? Share screen, and then I will meow. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. So these are my responses. Can you see them?
No. I can't, I don't think you shared your screen.
I didn't? Oh, okay. My bad. Here. I didn't get to this one. That's the one thing I didn't answer. Kind of an important one, too. You should hammer that. Let me go inside and grab a bottle of water. I'll be right back.
Okay. Wait, Strauss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, why would it matter if you don't, if you like add on to the existing systems?
Well, because it would be like there's a card somewhere in there that I cut that shows, or it's a couple pieces of evidence combined. If you add them together, it shows that the total tax requirement or revenue requirement to fund both all existing social programs plus a UBI would total almost the entire GDP. So you have to tax everybody nearly 100%.
Wow.
So you might want to run that in the neg case right off the bat to make sure that I can't win by adding on. Now I didn't really make that argument that even if I lose the adding on argument that I should win the round. I should have made that argument, but I didn't. So you got that to hammer too.
Where is that?
Well, look, where's that card?
Yeah.
Let me look. Hold on. There may be a. Alright. I would Google it. I don't know where I put the card. Let me see. Hold on. Don't be dumb, Eric. Don't redo work you've already done. It must be in a third document on UBI. No. H1B and UBI get confused in my head because they kind of sound the same. They're 3-letter things. Alright, let's see. Yeah, maybe it's here. Do you have this document? This is a good document. Let me share it with you. Yeah, it's like it takes capital gains shit and applies it a bit to the UBI thing. So, oh yeah, I shared it with you. It's called UBI from Capital Gains Notes. I think it's there. Wait, is it? Alright, let me find it. I can't find it in these documents. Okay, so how much of GDP would federal Okay, well this one here says it would only cost $2 trillion a year. That seems to be the common thing. This one says 2.5 trillion a year. Here's the search results. You click that in the chat and pick whatever you want from there. It's actually less than I thought. But existing expenditures are See, this only uh, the UBI that's being advocated here isn't a real UBI though, so that's not going to do. Okay,
Well,
so
what do you refute?
look, $1,000 per month cash grows the economy. Wait, it costs $1,000 a month cash costs about $3 trillion. Okay, but what you're talking about is more like $6 trillion. What's the current federal budget? Okay, federal budget $25,000 a year would be about $6 trillion. Okay, the current federal budget is about $4 trillion, so that's $10 trillion you're looking at for $25,000 a year UBI. $10 trillion. The total GDP is $14 trillion. So you're looking at most of the GDP.
Okay. What do you refute vertical externalities with?
I'd kick that point. You're not going to win that one unless you defeat you got to say his only defense against the vertical externalities thing is if we accept his double fiat plan. Now, he's made the claim that it's a funding plank, but he didn't extend that in the second speech. And he didn't address my double fiat contention in the second speech at all. Unfortunately for him, even though he did a great job, he dropped this voter, and it is the round voter. He can't fiat twice, therefore he can't get the plan advantages. Since he can't get the plan advantages, he doesn't solve externalities. So that means externalities defeats verticalities. I don't know why I keep saying externalities. Verticalities defeats the economic impact of his UBI because his UBI doesn't account for verticalities, and this is why that's so important. Something like that. And you should say he double turn. His turn on my systems theory is in fact double turnable because all he's done is defeat us both. It means he fails to affirm. He's not actually. I don't need to negate. He needs to affirm. Double turn. He loses the round on that, and he loses on the double fiat. Then go pow pow at the end. Know what I'm saying, dog?
Yes. I do not need to negate.
Right. You don't need to negate. You just need to prevent me from affirming. Negating being the natural state of things.
Wait, what are vertical externalities?
It basically means that because two different governing bodies can tax something separately, there's this weird kind of unpredictable impact between changes in the federal tax structure, which impacts states in one way, and changes between states' tax structures in order to attract new business, for example, and how there's the current economics theory says, oh, we can predict tax impacts because when one state raises taxes, that makes business more likely to go to a less highly taxed state, and that creates a race to the bottom in terms of taxation. But that's actually, I mean, the thing is, the card doesn't really say anything that's very useful. It's just there to muddy shit, really. Your point being, it mixes in with the complex adaptive systems thing. It says you can't predict how these changes to taxation are going to impact the economy, basically is all it says. And it's because you're not factoring in the way that federal and state taxation protocols interact with each other in a chaotic fashion.
Okay. I think I'm ready.
All right. You got, what, 6 minutes?
Wait, so, like, in a real round, like, what would you, like, do, like, to make it not so obvious that you're trying to make them stuck, like, with the inherently progressive and the systems theory thing?
Well, I mean, in this instance, I'd pounce on the fact that your opponent made two critical mistakes. You know, you FE polish it. You give it like a bit of like, wow, I'm going to be lucky to escape from this round because they dropped these two key voters, and these are why these are voters, because they're the top frame level, so they impact everything underneath it. It should work in LD.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, bring all your pias.
Okay. I'm ready. So 6 minutes. Time starts now. So first, Judge, I would like to address the framework. So the value, justice is more important than prosperity because we must be fair in determining how people get money. We should not allow 4 people with $0 to steal $1 each from someone with $5. And UBI might be an effective mechanism for growth and equality, but only insofar as it correlates with reduced taxes or the elimination of counterproductive redistributive schemes. In other words, it might be a less bad way to do an inherently bad thing than the way we are using right now. However, the positive impacts aren't from UBI. They're from the elimination of status quo progressivism. Because my opponents cannot eliminate these other schemes without exhausting the fiat before reaching the ground they need to win, then AF has no choice but to affirm via raising taxes. They can produce a funding plan as is consistent with planned debate in general. They cannot, however, use the fiat twice, first to eliminate existing programs and then to launch a replacement program of UBI. Also, this is an extension on progressivism, because wealth is an identity tag. A person's status is ontologically attached, meaning the poor are seen as a group being wrong, the rich are seen as a group wronging. If I'm poor, I need help and will hopefully be someday former poor. The progressive positions him/herself as the ones who knows best. Relative poverty is prioritized over deprivation as a criterion because identities are evaluated in comparison to each other, not to a static standard that meaningfully defines. And inequalities visible in the status quo justify conclusions about the system. Unequal outcomes are presumed to be the result of unfair conditions. Governance is seen as the architect and overseer of the economy. Framing is largely ignored. Rights, so basically, Judge, you should prioritize rights and justice over prosperity, which is my opponent's value. And now onto the fact that UBI is progressive. My opponents made two critical mistakes during their speech. First, they did not successfully respond to the fact that UBIs are inherently progressive because it is path dependent. It is giving money to a lot of poor people to level the playing field with the few are rich. That is progressivism in its finest. And UBIs are progressive in of itself, which is the main point in this debate. Also, my opponents can't simply say that it isn't progressive at all, which is what they did in their speech, because my systems theory argument states that UBIs are way too complex to give a yes-no answer, and time-space compression, which goes against the legislation of their plan. By Gallus B, an extension. Cross-level drivers of change do not add up in a linear, predictable manner. Decades of empirical and theoretical research on complex adaptive systems clearly shows that man-made systems are characterized by both positive and negative feedback loops operating over a range of spatial and temporal scale. This results in developments over time, characterized by periods of incremental change followed by fast and other often irreversible change and survival with immense consequences for economies, vital ecosystems, and human welfare. Analysis. My opponent's replicated systems theory framework means they lack the analytical leverage to affirm. This completely affirms the fact that, well, my opponents are trying to argue that, UBIs are not progressive because of this and because of that. But it is already inherently progressive, and they cannot say that it is not progressive because of my system theory argument. It is just too complex to just simply give a yes or no answer and to simply try to make it seem that UBIs that are path dependent to being progressive are not progressive. And finally, by Gallus, the complexity theory starts from the assumption that there are large parts of reality in which changes do not occur in linear fashion. The most salient difference lies in the systems theory. Within social sciences, assumes that a single system equilibrium is reached through linear effects and feedback loops between key system variables. CAS emphasizes non-linear causal effects between and within systems. And now onto the extension of time-space compression. 60 years ago, centralized institutions were indispensable, information technologies were primitive, communications between locations were slow, and the public workforce was relatively uneducated. In order to gather information and dispense orders efficiently, there was little alternative but to bring all public health employees together in one hospital, all public work employees together in one organization, all bank regulators together in one or two institutions. There was plenty of time for information to flow up the chain. But today, information is virtually limitless. Communication between remote locations is instantaneous. Many public employees are well educated as well. There's no time to wait for information to go up the chain of command. And so now to address the 2 times fiat. Judge, my opponent completely dropped this argument in the second speech. This is the determining factor in whether or not his plan can work. My opponent can knock both fiat to replace existing systems in the status quo and to fund his cryptocurrency plan as well. It's either one or the other, and we will win either way because if both UBI and existing systems are in place, it will be impossible to pay, making prosperity less likely and being inherently progressive as well. If the cryptocurrency plan gets refuted, my opponents cannot win the income inequality argument, which they claim is the biggest impact in the round, and they have nothing on the flow. And finally, vertical externalities. His only defense against vertical externalities was with the double fiat plan using cryptocurrencies. He didn't address his argument, and therefore, a vertical externalities point still stands. This is a voter, as the AF has not addressed the fact that there are too much taxes to consider when implementing the plan. And also, we double turn on his turn in the systems theory. He said that we both lose on systems theory. However, I do not need to negate while he has to affirm. That means the argument affects him the most, as it prevents him from affirming without using a flawed system, leading to all my impacts. I win this point along with vertical externalities. These are my 2 voters in the round, and please vote nay.
Nicely done. Nicely done. The thing I would say is don't use that thing that says he can provide a funding plank if he did provide a funding plank. Only read that part if he didn't provide a funding plank. Because I would turn that and say, he said I could do this. You know? That's only if they don't do that, then you go, they could have done this, but they didn't. Which is a great argument always. Whereas but that one would play into my hands if you read it in that context, right?
Yeah.
So then the other thing I wanted to say about that speech was, what I said in response to CAS was just basically, well, it may be true that it's hard to predict things, but we can predict better than nothing at all. In other words, that if we just guess randomly, it's 50%. Even if we can only predict at 52%, that's better than no predictive impacts at all. But what you needed to say was, that's what I said, and I didn't substantiate it at all. I just made the claim. I didn't really provide any justification for believing it at all, that in fact we're better than 50%. The problem isn't a matter of percentages, it's a matter of 50% of what? If we only count the impacts you want to count, then sure, your shit's great. Oh, you don't want to count the fact that it also causes cancer and kills 1 million people? You just don't want to count those impacts? Okay, well then I guess your plan's still great, right? So that's the problem with the percentages thing is, if I'm saying, oh, well, I've got a better than average percentage of being right about my predicted impacts, your point should be, yeah, but you're not factoring the fact that it's open systems. That is, it may impact something totally unrelated in ways we can't predict that are totally harmful. And you're not only are you not accounting for those impacts, you're ignoring the fact that that's what my argument says.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, we good for today?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, Edmond. Talk to you later.
Bye.